are back with the second episode of the top 100 albums of the 21st century as voted by you guys. It's been very interesting to say the least thus far. One episode in, and now we're going to be counting down numbers 90 to 81 on this one. Looking forward to getting into it with my good friend, as always, Nathaniel A. Hart. Thank you for being back, man. Can't
Oh,
wait.
couldn't miss it, man. And I feel like I'm contractually obligated to. My apologies.
Yeah.
Even though there's no contract that's been signed. But I love doing this. I love doing this with you, and going to be some interesting discussion as always. Always something to be divided about, and perhaps that will be the case in this episode as well.
Yeah. Well, let's get into it. Let's not waste any time at number 90. Gossip in the Grain by Ray LaMontagne from 2008. I'm so glad that this made the list. Sweet Ray being represented here. One of the greatest vocalists of all time, in my opinion. This guy just kind of came out of nowhere in the mid 2000s, and I've been following him ever since. I mean, this is personally my favorite album of his because I think you get a little bit of different flavors of different styles from the opening track. You Are the Best Thing, which has that kind of Motown vibe that he had shown he has a knack for previously on songs like Three More Days. You've got just beautiful ballads like Let It Be Me, which means a whole lot to me personally. It's kind of my wife and I's song together. I've seen him perform it live. I've seen him live three different times and never fails to disappoint. But yeah, there's just so much greatness on this record. Gems like I Still Care for You, which is kind of like a dreamy alt pop song that has like just really cool production on the percussion, especially. And speaking of percussion, you've got a song called Meg White, which is literally about Meg White, and it's almost on the verge of being ridiculous, but the way that he plays it like this psychedelic 60s kind of throwback, it makes it work in my opinion. And then you've got blues rockers like Henry Nearly Killed Me. You've got like literal barn burners like Hey Me, Hey Mama, which also ends up in like a kind of New Orleans kind of jazz thing. And a Falling Through is another kind of just heartbreaking ballad where he says, why did you go? And has this really nice contrasting harmony on it. This, in my opinion, should have been higher on the list, but I understand a lot of people still don't even know who Ray LaMontagne is, which is a shame. But yeah, so glad it made it.
Well, I know who he is because you told me about him, and this album didn't make my list. So I'm okay with it being at this spot. But yeah, this is still a really solid album. Of course, I love the opening track. You know that kind of Stax sound that he's replicating, very Otis Redding like. I think more than anything, just maybe his most iconic song. Just one of the best hooks he's ever written. I think everyone knows it, even if they haven't heard it or know who Ray LaMontagne is. It's just kind of in the background through cultural osmosis. Love that song. I really love the song Sarah, which kind of it's very psychedelic in a lot of ways, and the chord progression is beyond mind blowing. What he's doing, and just how he's talking about this kind of lost love in such a contemplative and beautiful way. It's very complimentable. Isn't there even a Mellotron on this song, or am I wrong about that?
You're probably right. Yeah,
I
I
might
wouldn't be
be.
surprised.
I'm going to check on that just because. Oh, there is a Mellotron on that song. Or
Yeah.
never mind. There's a Mellotron on this album. But regardless, I love that song sonically. Hey me, hey mama, as you said, just you hear that banjo. It's the barnyard blues, man. It's just absolutely awesome. And of course, the New Orleans jazz elements he brings at the end really stands out as one of my favorite Ray LaMontagne songs of all time. Also love Henry Nearly Killed Me. It's a shame. Really big standout. My problem with this album, I think a lot of the times, I know you say You think he's one of the greatest vocalists of all time. I definitely put him in the top 100 or so, but I just think sometimes his delivery is a bit sleepy, and I think on this album, that and the arrangement, and I know you know, like Let It Be Me, it's your guys' song, that's great and everything. I'm not as huge on it. I mean, I get it; it's more memorable than a lot of the other songs on there, but I just think it's kind of like instrumentally a little bit flat. Well, not you know, musically speaking, but just the sound of it. I just don't think really is very grabbing to me. And same thing with like Winter Birds, which goes on for like over 6 minutes. Not a huge fan of it. Nothing bad on here. I'm just not a fan of a lot of the slower tracks because I just don't think they really stand out. But the stuff that does stand out really does, in fact, do that. And yeah, I'm glad to see him represented on the list at the very least.
Yeah, yeah. Like if he didn't make it, I was gonna just say like I quit because uh like seriously, this dude could sing the phone book and I'd love it. I just think he's got just one of the like just
So
that
unique.
rasp. Yeah, that
Yeah,
natural
yeah,
rasp that like I'm jealous of for any vocalist that has it. And then on top of it, like he's such a great singer-songwriter and like all the songs you mentioned, I think that shines through. So like the slower songs like Winter Birds and Gossip in the Grain are probably my least favorite.
yeah.
Same
Pretty
with
boring.
you. But yeah, I mean overall, so glad that this made it. So that is gonna bring us now to number 89.
Vampire Weekend from 2008, the self-titled debut album, really one of the most distinct debut albums of its era for sure. I mean, I remember hearing, I think A Punk was in like Lego Rock Band or something when I had it on the DS, so I was always familiar with that song. But really, I just love the way Ezra Koenig and the gang blended a lot of ska and kind of like African music, sort of taking a page out of the Paul Simon and Peter Gabriel book, who obviously, you know, even made the top 10 of our top 80 albums of the 80s. And I just absolutely love the way they fuse that with elements of like chamber pop. It really, I
Mhm.
feel like they're kind of like if Wes Anderson was a band. Like
Yeah,
that's kind of like how I feel about
that's how
Vampire
I felt
Weekend.
about that listening to it
Yeah,
too.
dude, and just the mellotrons on here, it's really a combination I've never heard before, and I think that's what made Vampire Weekend stand out when they hit the scene that like 15 years ago or so. But so many great songs on here, just from the opening track, "A Mansford Roof." You know you're in for something quite original. Of course, I think A Punk is probably the definitive Vampire Weekend song. I mean, just that driving ska riff. It's just absolutely amazing. And look outside, the raincoat's gonna say, "Oh." I mean, just
Mhm.
one of the best hooks ever with that mellotron, just like playfully going along in the background. It's so beautiful, but it's so punchy. I mean, it's everything you would want out of a song. I also love Cape Cod Casa
Yeah,
Kauska. I don't know how
I
to
like
say it,
that too.
but
Yeah,
and how they even reference Peter Gabriel on that track if they
yeah.
aren't making it apparent enough. M79 is also great. There's a lot, and "The Kids Don't Stand a Chance" is one of my favorite Vampire Weekend songs as well, and certainly one of their most political songs, especially on this album because they got a little bit more political as time went along. But I still think that this is their best album. I really do. I think this is really a band coming into full form right from the get. This is honestly perfectly placed because I had it at 89 on my list,
Wow.
believe it or not. So yeah, I'm really glad to see it here at this spot, and glad to see Vampire Weekend represented in the countdown here.
Yeah, yeah, I'm not mad at this one, and I hate to say it, like I hadn't gotten to them until right before we did this episode. So listening to it was yeah, a real joy. Yeah, the way I was gonna say something similar about like it having a
Yeah.
Wes Anderson movie vibe, but also it like I could just hear this like in a house show like on a college campus with
Yeah.
kids with red cups. Like you can just picture that happening, which the cover art kind of feels like that as well. But
Yeah, that's what
uh,
they're kind of going for aesthetically.
sure,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And the song Campus also I felt was a
Right.
strong one. To me,
Sure.
like the first half of the album is really strong, and then like the second half kind of falls off a little bit until Kids Don't Stand a Chance. But yeah, really strong record, and I'm looking forward to listening to more of their stuff because I had heard of them, of course, and I'd heard some other things that Rostam had done on the side,
Sure. Me too.
but yeah, it's really great, man. Like all the songs you mentioned,
Hmm.
really just upbeat, like kind of puts you in a good mood. And yeah, I wasn't quite expecting that. I didn't know what to expect, but
Yeah, man. I will
um,
say I
yeah,
don't like One Blake's Got a New Face though. I think the hook on that song is absolutely obnoxious, which
yeah,
maybe holds it back from me like loving this album, but it's still really
agreed.
damn
Yeah,
good.
yeah, definitely. So glad it made the list. So yeah, great pick, guys. So now that is going to bring us to number 88. Beggars by Thrice from 2009. I'm so excited. Another great one that was on my list that was much higher on mine once again. But hey, I'll take it. Having Thrice on the list is great. I think they're one of the most solid and consistent rock bands out there today. It took them a little while. Like they started out in more of a, I guess, more aggressive, like post punk post rock genre, but this is just kind of straight up rock or alt rock, and it's just, I think from start to finish, their best album. You've got amazing rockers like The Weight. You've got ballads that build up in such a heavy way, like Circles. You've even got songs that throw in some really cool off kilter piano rhythms on Double Speak. In Exile has always been a fan favorite, but for me, the best track on here, and probably their best track of their entire catalog, is the closing track, Beggars, of the namesake of the album, which just lyrically it is so deep. And Dustin Kensrue, I think, is kind of a modern day prophet, man, the way that he writes about things on such a spiritual level. This just cuts to the core of humanity, and the music at the end, man, it'll just like, it feels apocalyptic the way that Tepe plays that lead guitar riff. Actually, I think Dustin plays lead guitar on this one, but they're all just, all four of them are super talented, heavy as hell to see them live. And Dustin Kensrue, another one like Ray LaMontagne, who I think is very underrated in general, but as a vocalist, like he also has this really cool rasp and but just uh, a power behind his every move. And yeah, I mean, there's other great albums of theirs. This is, I think, their seventh, after it came right on the heels of the Alchemy Index, which is a really cool concept album in and of itself. But Beggars, I don't know that they'll ever top it, man. And so glad that it made the list.
Wow, that's some high praise, man. Yeah, like you said, I haven't really heard of this band. I mean, maybe through like maybe seeing your list or something, but I'm not too
Mhm.
familiar. I promise as this goes along, I'm going to have heard most of these albums, but as it stands, the first few episodes, maybe not as much. So yeah, this is definitely a band I know I have to do my due diligence on at some point. But yeah, man, it sounds like you really love this album.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I think you would really enjoy them.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, it's their first couple albums, it felt like they didn't even quite knew exactly who they were, but after, album 3 and 4, like it starts to get great, and they've just been consistently great through their last album, which just came out last year. So highly recommend, and so glad it made it. So guys, that is going to bring us to number 87.
Glory
glorious Father.
Sinner Get Ready by Lingua Ignota, which came out in 2021. And this was an album I had never heard before this past week. And I gotta say, man, I could not get into this. It just isn't really my cup of tea, I guess you could say, because it sounds like a nightmare. And I guess that can work for, if you're doing a horror film soundtrack, which it sounds like it could easily be. And it was recorded like in a rural area of Pennsylvania, um, using all acoustic instruments. So, Lingua Ignota, aka Kristen Hayter, she almost sounds like some kind of witch, like doing witchcraft, and it's really kind of off-putting and creepy in a way that I was listening to it and I was just like, yeah, I'm not feeling this, and I probably never will. And yeah, it's like, uh, I, I don't know, man. Like when I will say this, like when you read about the subject material, like, so Kristen had gone through several years of an abusive relationship,
Hmm.
of physical, mental, sexual abuse, the whole thing. So
Hmm.
knowing that, like, it makes a bit more sense, I suppose. But I mean, this, I've heard many breakup albums that I love, but this just made me like feel gross and I, I don't know, man. Like I prefer my music to not terrify me. So I really, really did not like this album, and I'm a little sad it's on the list. So
Hey, I haven't listened, no comment. But what I will say is, I know that this is an album that a lot of people really love. So I do want to check
yeah.
her out at some point. I don't know, man. Maybe it is just about kind of like execution and sort of like inflicting that upon someone else, kind of like getting you into mindset. But I will to say, to be fair, I mean I'm not a fan of Courtney Love screaming, so I don't know
Yeah.
what that means. But that's just something I'll put out there.
Yeah, and I mean, to each their own. I mean, I guess, if you're a fan of this sort of just like I like when I say this goes dark, I'm talking like this was really haunting, like in a bad way. But there were moments, I have to say, um like in the middle of the record and at the end, where it felt like she was doing more of like a different take on gospel music in some way, and it had little moments of where I could see someone could say beauty, but for the most part, this was just yeah, not for me.
Well, I'm
So
glad you found some redeeming qualities in it.
yeah, I give it more than a 0 out of 10. I'll put it that way.
Good.
So anyway, I guess good pick, guys. So that's gonna bring us to number 86.
I do my makeup in somebody else's car.
Melodrama by Lorde from 2017. The second appearance of Lorde on this list, I guess. And I'm not entirely surprised that this album made this list at all. I almost expected it to be on here because I know a lot of people love it. And obviously, this is her first collaboration with Jack Antonoff, which almost makes sense considering the style she was going for. Green Light was a big hit, obviously, when it came out. I guess it took the airwaves by storm, though I wasn't familiar with it. And I don't know, doesn't really stand out to me, so I'm not surprised that it didn't stick with me. Look, yet again, I think with this album especially, I think this is one of the most overrated albums of all time. I do not understand for the life of me why people say, "Oh, this is one of the greatest records ever." Like, what about it is like truly amazing from top to bottom? This is exactly the kind of pop music that I think is killing originality in mainstream distribution. Like when I hear this style of synth pop that it just sounds so lifeless, and it's so like uninteresting to the point where I get concerned that a lot of people won't do their due diligence and check out like actually like interesting music artistically from a sonic standpoint. Now, obviously, you guys who are watching this channel have voted. Obviously, I don't feel that way about you guys, as your lists have shown us, and that's cool if you enjoy this. But I just think that this kind of music has really watered down what used to be in the mainstream, and that doesn't necessarily sit well with me. But what I will say about this, I think Liability is absolutely phenomenal, which is a very sparse piano ballad where Lorde basically just bears her insecurities, and I think if that whole album sounded like that, this album would be incredible, because I really think Lorde's greatest strength, besides being a vocalist, is a lyricist, and I think that shows tenfold on that song. I just wish that this album was sonically didn't sound like everything else that's in the mainstream. That's just pumped out all the time. I really think it is one of the most overrated albums of all time. And though I don't say I don't reject it being on the list, I certainly would not put it on here myself by any way, shape, or form.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know that I'd be quite as harsh as you on that, but I do agree. I think Pure Heroine is a way better album, and I think sadly Lorde hasn't. And I don't know if she ever will quite match that
I hope so.
killer debut, but yeah, like this album definitely overrated overall. I mean, Greenlight I think does still hold up as being a great pop track, and Liability yeah, I think it definitely is the strongest track on here. And I agree, if she had leaned more into that kind of analog versus digital style on here, that could have been much more interesting overall. And even in the pop realm, around when this album came out, I remember that song Magnets that she did with Disclosure, where she was like featured on that track, was even more interesting of a pop song than a lot of the stuff that's on here. So I don't know. I don't know if you would blame the producer on this or just
No.
Lorde. Maybe not. I don't think she's a one-trick pony by any means, but I do think it's not as quality as her first outing. And yeah, I wouldn't have put this on the list, but
Right.
hey,
Well,
what
I,
are you
I
gonna
don't
do?
know. Like, if that's the style she wants to do, whatever. Like, I think that probably was the case, but I don't know, man. Like, I just, and look, I'm not one who's like, oh, organic music is the only good music. Like, I love
Yeah.
hip hop. I love stuff that's made on computers, but if it's done in an interesting way, sonically, then yeah, I can get into it. But I don't feel that way about this. And I also I do like Writer in the Dark, at least lyrically, how, just playing with that idea of, if you date a songwriter, something goes wrong, there's something's going to come out about you, sort of thing, kind of like a warning to all her future and potential partners. I really like those kind of ideas. Like, there's some good ideas, good lyricism, as I said. I don't dislike this album. I just think it's like one of the most overrated ever. So it's that and Exile on Main Street for me are like the two most overrated albums ever.
Don't even say that, man.
I love the Stones. Hey, what can I say, man?
I guess you must have said that when we talked about
I did.
the
I did.
70s, and I probably had the same gut reaction, but oh well. All right, well, that's going to bring us to number 85. Gimme Fiction by Spoon from 2005. I actually just recently talked about this on my channel because I'm going through the 2000s as well on my weekly top fives. And yeah, this is it's actually a spoiler alert, my favorite album of that year. And yeah, just the opening track alone lets you in for something just that you've never heard before. Like, I remember the first time hearing this album and just the strange, awkward rhythm of that song, and the deep piano and Britt Daniel playing the lead guitar licks as if like he was I don't know, man, like there was something wrong with him, but somehow makes it work and still is melodic. And then he's got that kind of Lennon nasally raspy voice that is just so cool, just no matter what the dude sings. But this I think is probably, it's actually not even my favorite album of theirs, but definitely top two. I mean, they are just one of the best bands out there, just pure alternative rock. You can't quite put them in a box, but they definitely have their own sound. And there's just killer grooves on this thing. Like I turned my camera on with that driving bass riff and him doing that really cool high falsetto throughout the whole song. My Mathematical Mind is another great one that almost has like this kind of Charlie Brown, or I should say Vince Guaraldi piano sound, but with hard hitting drums. A lot of songs in this were used in the film Stranger Than Fiction with Will Ferrell, and I think that's how I first heard of them. But I listened to this front to back in one sitting and just fell in love with Spoon instantly. And from there, I just, the whole thing is great. There's not a weak track on it, and I'm so glad that they are represented on this list. Should be higher, but I'm not going to complain.
Well, I also listened to this front and back, and thought it was all right. I mean, I mean, honestly, I don't really get what like makes them stand out. Maybe rhythmically speaking, but I just listened to this, and I was like, I don't know, like I don't really see what makes them stand out against any other indie rock band. Like, yeah, I turned my camera on, was great. I really like some of the, as you said, some of the interesting rhythms that they have going on, but I really don't care lyrically at all what they're saying, and I really don't know like what they're trying to get across lyrically. And maybe that's
well, I think
what
on
it is.
this album specifically, they were going for some just kind of out there, literally fictional stuff. Where the Beast and Dragon Adored, especially, he's singing about like dragons and stuff that really makes no sense. But
Yeah, and why do I give a shit about that? I think that's the point I'm trying to make.
yeah, well, they were having fun with it, I think.
Sure,
So,
sure.
but yeah.
I mean, cool for you Spoon fans, but I don't really. I wouldn't put this on the list if I'm being honest. But like, I'm happy because I know you're a big fan of Spoon, so it's like, okay, cool. Like they're only in the 80s. I can live with that.
Fair enough.
I don't know, man.
Well, I think you would probably, if you got to some of their other albums, I think you would enjoy them more because lyrically they do get into some deeper stuff down the road. But I just think they're freaking great, man. So anyway, now that brings us to number 84.
Modern Times by none other than Bob Dylan from 2006, the only artist to have made it on every single countdown, as it should come to no surprise. Probably.
All right, Bobby Z.
Oh, okay, let's go. Yeah, I mean, this really is. If you had to take beat for beat, who had the most? Well, I don't want to say consistency because obviously Dylan has had his weak spots if you've listened to his whole discography, but just at the level that he is still writing at and the periods in which he was putting out some really artistic highlights, I think he's the greatest artist of all time, longevity-wise, everything about it. And I think this album proves it, coming after the Great Love and Theft as well. I think the early 2000s was really just phenomenal for Dylan. But this is one of my favorite Dylan albums, and I think my favorite Dylan album from that period. And it's just amazing taking, listening to the greatest songwriter of all time really kind of like address, as he says, modern times, even from the very kind of like playful and abstract Thunder on the Mountain that opens this thing up. I was thinking about Alicia Keys years. I mean, it's just so funny hearing like Dylan name drop all these artists, and just it just feels like a classic Dylan song. It is the kind of like very sort of impressionistic sort of lyrics, him just flowing through all this stuff. But really, I think why this album is so powerful and so moving, even though, you know, the blues structures that Dylan has become known for in recent years, I think this and Love and Theft really show a bit of variety, you know, in regards to some of the arrangements that are kind of like country, old-timey country tinge. And I just love the way he plays around with like the steel guitars and stuff on here, and very almost jazzy in some tracks. But more than anything, it's really his lyrics and Dylan kind of reckoning with his own mortality for the first time, and just talking about you know, his own sort of time on this earth. And you know, especially with songs like When the Deal Goes Down is, oh my goodness, one of my favorite songs on this album, one of my favorite latter day Dylan songs just in general. And just the way he delivers that, I'll be with you when the deal goes down, you know, that old raspy voice of his. But yet again, one of my other favorite ones I kind of alluded to with that country style, Beyond the Horizon, is probably my favorite song on here, with him really, you know, tackling mortality head on. And what I absolutely love about this song, and this is how brilliant of a songwriter Dylan is just, it could be taken as like this, you know, him talking to this woman and kind of like saying, you know, our love's so strong, we will, you know, share it into the great beyond. Or it can be taken as him talking to God directly once he gets to the other side. And I love the ambiguity of that. And I think that's what makes it all the more powerful. But I mean, there's so many great songs on this album. Spirit on the Water is another absolute highlight on here. I could go on and on. I do think Ain't Talking goes on a little bit long, but still, it's a really, really solid song. I don't think there's a weak song on here, and I think it goes to show that even to this day, Bob Dylan is still creating like genius level work. Even if his albums aren't always as consistent, you can tell that he's still writing at such an intellectual level that I don't think any of his peers, except maybe Randy Newman, are really even functioning at.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And yeah, I mean, you said it all, man. I mean, and the fact that he is literally the only artist that's made it on every single decade countdown that we've done now, that says it all. I mean, Spirit on the Water is probably my favorite track on here. That is just such a beautiful ballad, but also like, I love how playful it is.
Yeah.
The way that the guitar is strummed, that dun, 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 dun,
And I
dun.
just got to interject for a second, because it still has that playful sense of humor that made Dylan so great. Like, I think it's that line where he says, "You do right all day, and then you do wrong all night." You know, it's just so clever,
exactly.
and just gets a chuckle out of me every time.
Yeah.
Honestly, I think this should be a lot higher on the list.
Yeah, I don't really blame you. I think I had it lower, probably around this point. I don't recall exactly where on my list, but so I don't love it quite as much as you do. But I mean, so it's so solid. I mean, Working Man's Blues is another standout to me. I think it's another one that's just brilliant songwriting. I mean, what can you say? Just yeah, hard
It's
to
Dylan.
argue that he's like the greatest songwriter of all time. And yeah, just awesome. So glad that this made it, and may not be the last time we see him on this list, hopefully. So we shall see. But that now brings us to number 83.
Voodoo by D'Angelo from 2000. My goodness, I gotta say right away, what is this doing this low, guys? Look, I know some of you have not heard it, and some of you have, and maybe think it's a bit too slow or whatever, and didn't make it. Okay, like whatever. But really, this album is one of the most definitive records in neo soul. Of course, D'Angelo here, on the level of his contemporaries like Lauryn Hill and Maxwell, who I have not gotten into quite yet. But this really is one of the most definitive albums from its era, and probably the sexiest album of all time. I mean, this album is literally sex. It just is. I mean, just from the album cover, you can see. I mean, need I say more? But my goodness, D'Angelo's smooth singing style on here, and just artistically in general, it's like a mix of Prince and Marvin Gaye more than anything, but also some Al Green and Jimi Hendrix, man. I mean, it's just incredible. The sort of you know, what's it I'm trying to say? The psychedelic sexual vibe that this whole album exudes. But really, it isn't just a sex record, you could say. Like, he dives in a lot of interesting topics when it comes to the duality of, you know, one's own sin and religion, especially on Devil Pie, which has such a great sleek hook on here, kind of like directly dealing with the temptations that D'Angelo admits to giving into on a daily basis. But so many great songs on here, left and right, featuring Method Man and Redman. And I just love the way it pans back and forth from left to right. And some great verses from them as well. So many songs on here that are just absolutely incredible. The Root is one of the absolute standouts on here, and just the way that the vocals build on that song to the point where it gets very, you know, like you have them almost like going off each other, echoing off each other. And it just gets very, very psychedelic. It's just absolutely amazing. It's a 6.5 minute song, and I think that's the way to build these slow jam R&B tracks, because that's what this album is. But don't let that think, if you haven't heard that, and deter you that these songs are boring, because I don't think they could be anything but. Sonically, the way D'Angelo uses space on it. Because I will say Brown Sugar, his debut album, I think is another one of the most overrated albums ever. And I think he didn't play into space like he did with this album. I felt like that album really got very repetitive, very fast. There wasn't much about it sonically that really was interesting at all, I think, but here's where he really, really perfected. And I mean, if you know anything about D'Angelo, he's a perfectionist. I mean, after this, he didn't release an album for like another 15 years. So he really takes his time, and it shows, even though this was recorded in a few years. But my goodness, Spanish Joint is another one that stylistically just it blows your mind. Of course, like the horns coming in from Roy Hargrove, more than anything. Just amazing what he does on that track. I love his cover of Feel Like Making Love, too. Just it really feels like his own sort of feel. One of my favorites on the album, the horns. It really harkens back to that Memphis soul sound. That it just, the way he combines hip hop and all these elements is just amazing. Great Day, Morning / Booty, obviously, is another one. The closing track, Africa, yet again a very personal song and very interesting. It definitely does feel very Afro influenced in the way the music goes about. But I think the absolute masterpiece on here, one of the greatest songs of all time, you could even argue, is Untitled How Does It Feel, which also probably is D'Angelo's signature song, and his attempt at writing a Prince ballad like Adore. Saying he's like, I'm never going to be able to write a song as good as Prince, but man, if that was his task, like, he basically he hit the bar, man. Just amazing. Once again, 7 minutes long, but it's one of the most sensual, one of the most beautiful love songs ever put. And the way the psychedelic, it just gets absolutely blasted out by the end of the song, and it's just so trippy, but still so soulful and sensual. My goodness, this was like in my top 15. I don't know what this album's doing this low, and maybe it's because some of you haven't heard it. But my goodness, this is one of the greatest albums of all time. And I know I like to, you know, I don't like to bring them up all the time, but it's always an interesting comparison. Because Rolling Stone, on their 500 Greatest Album list, had this at 29, above the White Album by the Beatles, nonetheless. And I do agree with that, at the very least. So I just find it interesting how low it ended up on this list. But this is an absolute classic. As I said, should be way higher on this list.
Well, I do really enjoy it, and I think you pretty much said it all. I wouldn't say it's better than the White Album, but I do
More
think
consistent. I don't know.
for what it is, it's pretty great. And yeah, Untitled, How Does It Feel? Amazing track. Spanish Joint is probably my favorite on there. I think
It's
like
great.
just the heights it gets to is pretty incredible. But yeah, I don't know. I feel like maybe it's a little long for me personally, but yeah, I don't blame you for having it that high on your list, man. I think definitely also very influential on other artists in the neo soul category in this century. So and yeah, pretty crazy to think that he hadn't put out another album
No,
since for
and
such a
still
long time.
hasn't since
Yeah,
2015, man. And I'm
right.
waiting. I don't know if he's cooking up anything, but
Yeah.
anything D'Angelo
Amazing
comes out
vocalist,
with.
man. Yeah.
Oh yeah,
I mean, is he as distinct as some of his influences? No,
Hmm.
but I don't think he has to be because his style and his lane is so individually his. I mean, really, and that's why yet again when you talk about influence, that's why I think this album should be way higher on the list too. Because not only do I think it's incredible, but it really is one of the most impactful albums of its era. So, and I think maybe the best album in this episode.
Hmm. I don't know about that, but that'll bring us
Yes.
to number 82.
Niggas ain't gon' shit, then get the fuck up off the toilet stool. Bit behind my chin as I commence to take these.
Pinata by Freddie Gibbs and Madlib from 2014. What a great hip hop record. And this is one of those cases. I'm so happy about this because, there's things like lingua ignota and death grips that I'm being introduced to that I pretty much despise. But then there's instances like this where I feel like what a breath of fresh air. Like, how have I not heard this album before? And it's such a cool like throwback to like mid 90s gangster rap, but the production on it is so good that it feels very much now as well. And that has a lot to do with Madlib, who, as many people in that community know, is just a master at what he does. But Freddie Gibbs, like I had never even heard of this guy before. And I'm telling you, man, like his flow is incredible on some of these songs, especially towards the middle of the album where
Yeah.
things really get amped up on songs like Shitsville and Thuggin', which is so fun on the chorus on that song. Like, thugging and it feels so good and it feels so right. I just love it, man. And like those two tracks especially get me going. But then there's really cool songs like High, which is about getting high, which has a cool feature from Danny Brown.
Oh yeah.
Raekwon shows up on the track Bomb. There's like really not any weak tracks. I would say it, like Voodoo, I feel like this album might be a little long, but it was just like I nearly loved this thing. Like I just really had a good time listening to it. It felt like something that I had heard before, but I hadn't. So that's what this countdown's all about, man. Where people are voting for things that uh just put a smile on my face, and this is one of them. So I'm glad it made the list, and I think it's at a pretty decent spot.
No, that's cool, man. I dig that, because I feel kind of well similar in that sense about the whole the nice discovery sort of thing and just kind of expanding on what we didn't know. Would I put it above D'Angelo or Dylan? No. But I'm cool with this record. I like it enough. I didn't like it as much as you did. But that's the thing, man. Like I love Freddie Gibbs' flow. Great MC. Surprisingly, looks and sounds just like Tupac in a lot of ways.
A little
You can
bit, yeah.
definitely hear it. You can definitely hear
Yeah.
the influence, especially on this record.
I love tracks like Deeper, where he's really getting into some deep and personal issues, especially the whole story about him and this girl, where he doesn't really know if she's leaving him because she's matured over kind of like going for a gangster as opposed to like an actual kind of more set in his ways type of guy. It really is, the way he tackles those issues lyrically is really compelling. And I just think his flow as an MC is felt in every single word. I really love other songs like Shitsville as well, as one of my absolute favorites on this record. Real Uno. I think Robes is another highlight, with featuring Domo Genesis and Earl Sweatshirt from Odd Future, obviously, who I think's verses on here are absolutely awesome. and just the soulful production on there from Madlib. Oh my goodness, the samples used on that song blow my mind. So many great songs on here. I just think it's probably similar to what you feel with Voodoo, and I think it is probably more prevalent on this album though, just in general, because you have these songs then have outros that feels like the song's wrapping up and then they go on for like a minute and it's just really unnecessary. I think lyrically he kind of repeats himself. It gets falls a little bit too into the gangster rap tropes. Maybe he relies a little too heavily on it, because I do like the more forward-thinking stuff. And, but still, I mean, there's nothing bad on here at all. I don't think this is a weak record. I almost really enjoyed it myself, but I just think he could have cut this down and it could have been a much tighter hip-hop record. If my love for cheat codes says anything, I think I feel the same way about this. It's good, though. I mean, I get why it made the list, but personally, I'd probably have it a little bit lower, but not upset to see it here at all.
Interesting. Yeah, you mentioned cheat codes, because I almost dug this as much as cheat codes. Like that's how much I enjoyed it. But obviously love that one as well. But yeah, there's like some hard hitting stuff on here too, man. Like I was just looking through some of the lyrics on Shitsville, like when he's talking about his mom and he says, I wonder if she found the dimes and nickels in my Nike box. I wonder if she knows her older brother liked to light them rocks. I wonder if she's able to get by if I get killed. Like it tackles some heavy stuff, man. Like, and I love it.
There was another great line where he's like talking about, I got into the college for like Robin or whatever, and I graduated with honors or something. And I was like, dude, that line was so brilliant. I forgot what song it was on, but I was like, damn, dude, what a great bar.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to going back and listening to it again, man, because I've thoroughly enjoyed it. But yeah, I mean, again, this is what it's all about, and hopefully you guys that are watching this, and maybe you've never heard of some of these albums, and maybe even the ones that we don't like, you want to check out too, just to see if
I certainly
as much as we
to.
did. Yeah, exactly. But that is going to bring us to number 81.
Donuts by Jay Dilla from 2006. Only the second studio album from Jay Dilla, and I know most people don't think of Jay Dilla as like artist per se. Most people remember Jay Dilla for the amazing beats that he came up with, and just the unconventional samples. He really was a crate digger, if there ever was one, who really found like the most off-kilter and unique samples and sounds to tap into for all these other artists, as you can hear on artists like Erykah Badu or Tribe Called Quest. I mean, this guy really was the producer's producer. You know what I mean? Especially in hip hop. So when he passed away in 2006, it was just so tragic. Really, I mean, absolutely. Such a tragedy which happened with him. Only on his 32nd birthday had he passed, and this album came out on his 32nd birthday, which was actually 3 days before he passed. And I really thought going into this album it would deal directly with his mortality from an instrumental standpoint, because this is an instrumental hip-hop album, much similar to introducing DJ Shadow, which made the 90s list, which I also really dug. Look, I mean, this isn't something that I'm going to put on consistently. It isn't anything that I think, obviously, the samples do get a little repetitive, as interesting as they are. He's using a lot of Motown. You hear Smokey Robinson pop up on probably my favorite track on here, Don't Cry, which I think, considering what Dilla was going through, was really, really heartbreaking to listen to. And of course, there's so many great tracks on here. Like Lightworks, I think is a standout, the way he utilizes this advert into a really interesting and unconventional sample. I think it's absolutely incredible. You could say about so many of these tracks, and just the way it closed out from By Last Stone of the Night, like it really, the whole album in a way is almost like backwards, because it ends with Welcome to the Show and it starts with Donuts outro.
So I think
maybe he was making some sort of commentary on his mortality. But I don't know. It really doesn't feel like something that stands out in that way, like a man grappling with death, though maybe some instances here or there. Maybe that's not what it was supposed to be. Maybe people are reading it into it too much, and maybe that's why I don't love this album as much. But look, I get it. This is a really, really solid hip-hop record, very influential on instrumental hip-hop, and I know a lot of people really, really love this album. Now, if it were up to me, I'd probably prefer DJ Shadow's debut by a hair when it comes to instrumental hip-hop, but this is nothing to scoff at all. I'm really impressed with what Jay Dilla, most of this was recorded in his hospital room. So you got to give the man credit for really working right up into the end and creating something that was, truly impactful in some way. Didn't make my list, but I can certainly see why it could have made the final countdown. Let me have a couple spots lower.
Yeah, I mean, I gotta respect it for what it is, and I was new to this one as well, and I definitely enjoyed it. It just kind of feels like a mixtape where everything flows into each other. To me, there wasn't really like, in that way, a standout track necessarily, even though Don't Cry, I can see why you really mentioned that one as a standout because of the great vocal on it. But yeah, like some really interesting beats, some really cool things of taking some of these samples of commercials and things, or like Wolfman Jack from American Graffiti. So it's kind of cool, like when you're looking for some of those things. But to me, it just I wouldn't go as far as to say it just feels kind of like background music. But as far as hip hop goes, I definitely wouldn't have this higher than Cheat Codes or Pinata, obviously. But it's cool to see it on the list, and with all that is surrounding it, it's a beautiful thing that it even exists in the first place. So,
but I get what you mean for sure, because
it doesn't. I don't think it really stands out that way to me either. But influence wise, I mean, hey, maybe it does deserve a spot above some of these albums, that just came out, but. I don't know, man. It really, I hear about this album all the time, so I'm not surprised it made the list.
Yeah. So yet another interesting, somewhat surprising batch of albums here. We'll see where we go from here. I guess it's just going to keep getting better, hopefully. But you guys, just outdid yourselves with the variety alone on this top 100. So I think if you've been digging it so far, stick with us, because it's going to be a great journey.
Yes, sir. Absolutely. My goodness, what a pleasure once again hopping on here with you, John. And if you guys haven't subscribed to my channel yet, got to get on it, because there's going to be a lot of great stuff coming, especially one thing that I do want to announce in this video. And my friend John here will be joining me as well. But for the anniversary of one of our, I don't know if I want to call it one of my favorite movies, but certainly one of the ones
it is one of my favorites.
But technically not for me, but I'm telling you, 20th anniversary of The Room, we are doing a top 10 Room quotes video. My goodness, I cannot wait to dive into that film and dissect some of the most iconic quotes, not just from that movie, but of all time. I will go that far and say. So definitely stay on the lookout for that. And of course, if you haven't subscribed to Johnny Radio already, I mean, you got to do it, especially if you want to see what we're doing here, but also some other great countdowns, top 5 Fridays, what have you. The man has a lot of variety over there. So
yeah, can't wait, man. And can't wait for The Room. Thank you for letting me be a part of that, man. It's going to be great fun. So everybody check that out, and we will see you next week for the next part of this countdown. We'll see you then.
Peace, guys.
Some straight good, and it feels so good, and it feels so